Logan the Layman Critic here. Since I went through the Nightmare on Elm Street series last year, I thought it only appropriate I make a ranking for its rival franchise, Friday the 13th. This ranking covers parts 1 through 8. I'm excluding the New Line entries. For one, the series has a very apparent ending at part 8. It's wrapped up pretty well, and I'll go into that going forward. And the other reason is that the New Line films just suck. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. Let's talk movies.
Starting at the very bottom is the original, and I'm sure I'm already getting some fans angry. I can appreciate this film for what it created, but time has not treated Friday the 13th well. A lot of the kills and or violence happens off-screen or just out of frame, something that a slasher film should do at an absolute minimum. Betsy Palmer as Pamela Voorhees is creepy, so long as she isn't attacking. The final chase shows her to be comically inept when it comes to offing Alice, the final girl. It leaves you wondering how she managed to kill everyone before her. Speaking of, much of the shots showing the killer before the full reveal are quite clearly a man. Then again, maybe Pamela Voorhees is supposed to look really masculine. After all, her decapitation scene shows her with very manly hands. To the credit of the creative powers, there are still some tricks pulled to great effect. Henry Manfredini gave the film, and franchise by extension, a distinctive identity with his score, a sort of hybrid between Psycho and Jaws. Plus there's the thing that everyone knows. I was thrown off when Annie. I was thrown off when Annie was killed. Her personality and how the story followed her led one to believe that she would be the protagonist. Nope. Steve Christie, the guy who's behind reopening Crystal Lake, that's also a nice mislead. He's a shady character. If I hadn't known who the killer actually was beforehand, I would have pinned everything on him. And I'm sure audiences in 1980 did the same. Lastly, there's one thing in this movie, and it's my absolute favorite bit of spookiness. One of the girls is let out into the rain after hearing the faint voice of a child screaming for their mother. It's never explained whose voice it is. Is it the restless Jason Voorhees crying out from the grave, or is it merely his mother speaking in his voice? Whatever the answer is, I'm inclined toward the former. It's an unsettling bit of horror. This movie isn't required viewing to appreciate the series. You could start at part 2 without missing anything important, but if you're not in a hurry to get to Jason as the killer, this is worth giving a look. It wasn't until my last viewing of part 5 that I began to appreciate it a whole lot more. Its two biggest faults are the antagonist and the overall sleazy tone. Let's talk about the first one. We're made to think that Jason has returned from the grave to hunt down and kill Tommy Jarvis, tracking him down to a halfway house and killing any troubled youths or staff that get in his way. But it turns out that it's not Jason. It's a paramedic who snapped after finding his son brutally murdered earlier in the film. We don't know any of this until the end, and it leaves you feeling cheated. People wanted the real Jason, not some guy. It doesn't bother me as much as it used to, but I completely understand why people were and are still turned off by it. Then there's the sleaziness. Now, Friday the 13th has never been what you would call a classy franchise, but part 5 leaves you wanting to take a shower after watching it. There's several characters who are crass, disgusting, crude, or all three. Hospital driver and his girlfriend, the two guys who are supposed to be greasers, I guess, the obnoxious redneck mother and son. I guess you could make the argument that it makes their murders that much more satisfying, but it still makes the movie hard to enjoy. As for the good stuff, let's start with John Shepherd. He does a fantastic job as a teenaged Tommy Jarvis. He's intense and very clearly capable of being dangerous, but you're sympathetic to him. He's struggling with PTSD, and he sees Jason around every corner. It's a performance that's far better than this film had any right to have. And then there's the kills. It has a body count of 22. Not all of them are by the imposter, but it's still impressive all the same. They're also very creative. Hedge trimmers to a girl's head, her lover's head strapped to the trunk of a tree by a leather belt and crushed, road flare shoved into a greaser's mouth. Good stuff. If you can get past those two major hiccups I mentioned, there's an enjoyable film here. It can be said that Part 3 is where the franchise really found its identity, and for that reason I can understand why it's a favorite for many. Jason's general appearance is finally settled on. He's no longer a slim, scraggly-haired country bumpkin. Gone are the plaid shirt, overalls, and sack over the head. Now he's bald, burly, and wears a hockey mask. The death scenes are pretty solid. All but one of the 12 kills are visually interesting or creative. The stoner guy getting thrown into a fuse box is kind of lame. There's also a nice callback to Kevin Bacon's death in the original film. But the best kill is when Jason is crushing a guy's head with his bare hands and pops one of his eyeballs out at the audience. Which brings me to the film's major pitfall, the 3D. There's no shortage of moments where you are being randomly poked in the eye by a character, whether it's juggling fruit, playing with a yo-yo, or pointing a stick. It's contrived and it sucks. The aforementioned kill is the only good use of this gimmick. This entry is kind of middle of the road. Not terrible, but not great either. Sure, it's got some neat kills, but other than giving Jason his iconic look, it doesn't differentiate itself enough from Part 2.
The title conjures up all sorts of awesome scenes that sadly are never realized. I remember seeing the VHS sleeve for this at the video store when I was a kid and thinking how absolutely terrifying it would be having Jason in your city, and that actually feels more terrifying to me than him being in the woods. But, as I said, those horrors don't really get explored. It's only in the last quarter of the film that they're in Manhattan, and most of that is in alleyways because Paramount Pictures was too cheap to allow the film any ambition. So the majority of the New York stuff is shot in Vancouver and LA. I feel for Rob Hedden, the director. He wanted to milk the city for all it's worth and take Jason to virtually every noteworthy place in Manhattan, Statue of Liberty, Broadway, Brooklyn Bridge, etc. The best he could get was a brief scene in Times Square. So, from a creative standpoint, Part 8 is a huge failure because of its compromises, but I don't blame him for it. But there is a good reason this is placed at number 5 on the list. False advertising from the title aside, putting Jason on a boat was a nice change. Having that allowed for plausible limitations on the characters. They couldn't just run off or drive away. They were in a storm and hours away from any land, so there's that claustrophobia and the threat felt even more immediate. And there's only so much boat, and it was only a matter of time before they would cross paths with Jason. There is one scene in the city that I especially like. Jason follows the 2 surviving teens into a diner, and one of the cooks tries to stop him, but Jason throws him into a mirror. A waitress cowers behind a counter as he slowly walks by, his reflection visible through the broken mirror. It's a chilling scene. The kills are a mixed bag. The couple he kills when he first revives, it's pretty lame. He strangles a girl, lame. A lot of the kills don't have much in the way of gore, but there's a good one where he takes a scalding hot rock and punches it through an athlete in a steam room. There's also this girl who's found dead with shards of a broken mirror stabbed through her. It's one of the more visually artistic shots in the whole series, and I like it. He also punches a guy's head off. That's one of my favorite kills. The thing I love most about Part 8, though, is that it brings Jason's story to a proper conclusion. Yeah, I mean, I know that New Line made a whole bunch of sequels, but they ignored the ending to Part 8. A lot of people don't care for this film's ending. Kane Hodder isn't all that crazy about it. I sort of get it. It's a little abstract for this kind of film. But I like that it brings Jason to a conclusive end. Throughout the film, the final girl is being haunted by visions of Jason as a child. This is a personal theory of mine that you can take or leave, but I saw this as Jason's true self crying out for freedom. He was an innocent kid that drowned and was mysteriously brought back from the dead, corrupted and absolutely evil. And each time he's killed, he comes back more powerful and less human than before. But the real Jason, the innocent child, is buried deep down. These visions are meant as warnings or cries for help, so when he's finally killed in the sewers, submerged and dissolved in toxic waste, all that remains is the true Jason. He's finally free and can rest peacefully. Again, this is only a theory of mine. It's really only a brief overview of what I think, but I believe it fits well with this film and the overall story. There's even a deleted scene where they show a close-up of Jason's face, and his younger self is struggling to crawl out of his mouth. I use that to support my theory, but I've spent too long on this, so let's move on to number 4. It can be said that The New Blood and its predecessor, Jason Lives, were a renaissance for the franchise. Both films added some much-needed freshness to the standard Jason kills teenagers formula. To start, the tone for Part 7 is the darkest in the series. The music, the way it's shot, even the protagonist's backstory is bleak and haunting. For this entry, we have Jason facing off against a girl with psychokinetic abilities. It's the only time he has ever had a regular living human capable of continuously dealing damage to him. The climax of the film is pretty awesome. Tina, the girl with psychokinesis, she uses her powers to hurl things at Jason, hang him, set him on fire, etc., etc. Jason never gets the crap kicked out of him in Paramount's series apart from Part 7. So this scratches an itch and it more than satisfies. Even Jason's defeat is unique. Tina summons the spirit of her father from his watery grave to subdue Jason and bring him down into Crystal Lake with him. The kills are among the best in the series, maybe the best, but only if you see them uncut. Unfortunately, the MPAA is the real villain of this movie, not Jason. So many great gore effects are trimmed down, so many memorable kills. The sleeping bag kill went from 6 blows against a tree to only 1. It's like Jason was neutered in his brutality. Remember the head-crushing kill from Part 3? This one does it even better. The uncut version has him collapsing the victim's skull down to the size of a large apple. Alas, it's trimmed down to practically nothing. Jason's design takes the undead monster look from Part 6 and kicks it up several notches. You can see his spine through his tattered clothing. When he's unmasked, an eyeball is missing, his teeth are protruding out, there's several gashes in his head, parts of his skull are exposed. I especially like the chain hanging around his neck. It's a nice callback to his defeat in Part 6, and it furthers the movie monster aesthetic. Director John Carl Buechler worked in special effects and makeup prior to this film, and his skills definitely show. That same year, he worked on Halloween 4 and A Nightmare on Elm Street 4. If you ever wished that Tom Savini had directed a Friday the 13th film, this is the closest that you'll likely ever get. The uncut footage appears to be lost, save for some low-quality VHS footage, but if it should ever turn up, I sincerely hope we're graced with the proper uncut version of The New Blood. It deserves it.
Friday the 13th Part 2 is, in my opinion, what the original should have been. The two are very similar in their look and tone, but Part 2 more or less resolves what flaws existed in the first film. The kills are much more explicit. There's only 1 kill performed that's out of frame and 1 that's off-screen, maybe 2, if you think Paul was killed. They leave that one up in the air. There's still quite a bit of censorship, and apparently the full footage in all its gory glory is lost, but it's still better than the first movie. The other improvement over the original is the killer. I remember as a kid, my friends would tell me about how they thought the first movie sucked because the mom was the killer and not Jason. Well, when I finally got old enough to watch these films, I ended up agreeing. Bessie Palmer is creepy, and I do think that the backstory and motivation for her character help in making the franchise what it was, but she wasn't menacing once she was actually unleashed. Jason is. My favorite scene is when Ginny and Paul are searching through a room in the dark and Jason is in the corner. Ginny realizes this and says that someone's in the room, and Jason quietly moves into a position to kill, and then Ginny screams that he's in the room. I don't know what it is about that scene that makes it so scary to me. Maybe it's because of Jason's absolute silence. I don't know, but I love that scene. Then we have his design. Now, even though I prefer where the character's look has evolved, I still really like his appearance in Part 2. I like the sack and overalls. The makeup when he's unmasked is probably my favorite, though the final chapter comes in at a pretty close second. The ending is kind of weird. It leaves us with questions that never get an answer in any of the subsequent films. I also really wish that they had gone with the original ending, where Mrs. Voorhees' severed head opens its eyes and smiles. Director Stephen Miner didn't like it, and so it was cut. And it looks like we'll never get to see it, which is a bummer. Still one of my favorites, though. If Part 7 is the darkest movie in this series, this one is the most lighthearted. But it's a welcome change. Part 6 is a course correction from the mistakes of its preceding entry. When you get this many films in, Jason ceases to be scary. Director Tom McLaughlin was smart enough to recognize this, and Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, wasn't meant to be scary. It's horror, certainly, but there's a self-awareness that wasn't previously there and hasn't existed much since. Certain lines of dialogue, or soft breaking of the fourth wall, draw attention to this. The characters have seen slasher movies, and when they see Jason, they know it's bad. It manages to circumvent the problem of stupid victims that frequently plague these type of films. They're plausible idiots now. It also gives Part 6 its own charm by telling the audience that they're in on the joke too. I imagine that more than any other Friday the 13th film, this one created the most enthusiasm and audience participation in the theater. It's hard to put into words exactly, but when you watch it, you'll likely get what I'm trying to say. Part 6 is also the first film in the series to bring a more explicitly supernatural bent to Jason's character. He's revived by a lightning bolt, and it's clearly not an accident. Unknown and evil forces are at play. It's his curse, his destiny to kill. His appearance has been made more monstrous as well. This is the Jason that most people think of when they hear that name. This is where zombie Jason began. I hate that term, by the way. For one, he's not a zombie, he's undead. And two, this isn't the first time he's come back from the dead, but I'm not going to digress further into my fan theories. I love the character's look here. You never get a clear look at his face, it's always in shadow, but if the fan sculpts that I've seen are accurate, then it's pretty cool. The work gloves and tool belt were a nice addition to the overall look, making it one of the more distinctive depictions of the character. C.J. Graham did a commendable job as Jason. He gives the character a machine-like efficiency. He's methodical. He never runs after his prey. He doesn't need to. He's already 2 steps ahead of them. It's very Terminator-like in a way. Sadly, like most, he only played the character once. The kills reflect the supernatural direction by making Jason capable of some incredible methods of murder, punching through a guy's chest with his heart in hand, a triple decapitation, accidentally ripping a guy's arm off while impaling him on a tree, breaking a guy's spine by bending him over backwards. I mean, you get the idea. No human being could do these things, and it's awesome. And as usual, the MPAA weighed in and robbed us of some good gore. Surprise, surprise. Jason Lives is a great sequel because they allowed a director with good ideas to do those good ideas. And it's a must-watch for any slasher fan. I'm going to start off by saying that I love this poster. The knife through the eye of the mask, the blood, all against a pitch-black background, and the title, Friday the 13th, the final chapter. Even the font for the final chapter tells you that they mean business. Yeah, minor quibble is that the gash in the forehead is reversed, but whatever. It looks right this way. After a quick recap of the previous 3 entries, the film proper begins with a crane shot that observes the aftermath of Jason's rampage and his subsequent death in Part 3. It gives the film a very cinematic look that wasn't previously there. The cinematography is quite good, with the lighting giving it a very moody tone, but remaining naturalistic and not overly stylized. One thing that the final chapter has over every other Friday the 13th film is the treatment of its characters. Now, I won't go so far as to say that they aren't disposable meat bags, but they feel less like caricatures. They have their own little storylines that intersect with the main story and keep you invested. You've got the girl who's still a virgin, and the nice guy that likes her. You've got a local girl trying to move in and wreck a visiting couple's otherwise happy relationship. You've got George McFly and the last American virgin on a quest to get laid for the weekend. Then there's what I would consider to be the 2 main stories. You have a man hunting for Jason in the hopes of avenging the death of his kid sister from Part 2. And then there's the Jarvis family, a newly divorced mom with a teen daughter and a young son. Here's the beginning of what you would call the Tommy Jarvis trilogy. I've never been a huge fan of Corey Feldman, but the more I think about it, the more I realize what a great job he does in this movie. He's a kid without being overly cutesy, yet he's also just the right amount of precocious so that you're not rolling your eyes. It's a successful balancing act. And he gets to kill Jason in the single best death scene for the villain in any of the films. Let's talk about Jason and those kills. Ted White is probably my favorite actor in the role. At the very least, he's my favorite to play early Jason, back when he still ran around and was capable of emoting and grunting. He's brutal. He puts a spear through a guy's junk, lifts him up out of the water. He pounds a corkscrew through a guy's hand and then delivers a meat cleaver to the head. He crushes a guy's head against a wall. He hacks a guy up with a garden claw. There's some good kills in this one. Maybe not the best. There's a few by-the-numbers death scenes, but there's more than enough to satisfy gorehounds. This is the last time that Jason could be considered genuinely scary. He was more grounded than what came later. He could be stopped. He could be knocked out, but you knew he was going to wake up, and that's what made it scarier. You'd watch as Trish and Tommy are trying to walk around the unconscious Jason, and you'd be completely tense waiting for the moment that he would grab for one of them. He refuses to be stopped. Even toward the end, there's this bit that I love where he gets his hand split with a machete, and he stops for a moment, watching it bleed out, and he's sort of mildly irritated by it. Tom Savini's take on the adult Jason's look brought some truly grotesque contributions. His nails are all long and black, his skin is dirty and grimy and turning gray, and it's pretty clear that necrosis is starting to set in. Minus the hair, Jason's face shares some consistency with the makeup of Part 2, at least more so than Part 3 anyway. Jason's death, whew. He gets a machete to the head, falls to the ground, machete first, and his head just glides down the blade. It's gruesome, and it's oh so satisfying.
If this had been a true final chapter, I don't think anyone would complain about his death scene. It's a terrific demise. But that does leave one with the question, should this have been the final chapter? In my opinion, no. This may be the best entry, but I love parts 6 and 7, and I think they add so much that they'd be sorely missed. They cemented the character's place within pop culture. I'm not sure that would have happened if things had stopped at part 4. And that's it. You'll find a lot of film snobs that look down on Friday the 13th. Ignore them. They may not be high art, but they're not meant to be. They're popcorn thrill rides, and some of the best from the 80s. Take them for what they are, and have fun. Thanks for watching.